Welcome to another episode of New Worker Radio presented by the Communist Workers Platform, bringing you national and international news from a worker's perspective. You can find more news and updates like this in our national newspaper, New Worker, at newworker.us. And you can find New Worker on Patreon, where every subscription helps us bring you more news like this. If you're outraged over high costs of living, soaring rents, and the stress of navigating day-to-day life, consider the CWP USA to fight for a real change. To learn more and sign up, go to cwpusa.org. And now, onto our program.
In this episode, we begin with International Working Women's Day, March 8th, which was declared by the Second International in 1910 and has its roots right here in the United States. Next, we take a look at the war in Iran from the perspective of the Communist Workers Platform. Then, we explore how artificial intelligence, AI, despite becoming a bigger part of our everyday lives, is being shaped by the goals of U.S. imperialism, in particular, its role in preparing for war and expanding surveillance. Finally, we close with a translated piece of the Communist Party, the KP, of Germany, on the Epstein scandal, a case that has shaken the United States and continues to fuel widespread anger and demands for justice. Sunday, March 8th, marks International Working Women's Day. Originating with the Socialist Party in New York City in 1908, the day was established by women workers consciously as members of the overall working class. Thousands of women workers rallied for better working conditions, and in 1910, Women's Day was declared at a meeting of the Second International with the participation of the great communists Clara Zetkin, Rosa Luxemburg, Alexandra Kollontai, and Inessa Armand. From its inception, Working Women's Day has been part and parcel of the class struggle of workers against the capitalist system. Today, women the world over are subjected to the same fundamental injustices and exploitative relations they were a century ago and for thousands of years prior. Despite the progressive facade capitalism has adopted in many countries, the issues facing working women cannot be fundamentally addressed within the limits of this system. Job insecurity, cost of living, workplace exploitation, and beyond are all too often most acutely experienced by working women. The United States is no exception. Women in the U.S. earn roughly 84% of the already low wages paid to working men. Working women are disproportionately affected by flexible and part-time work, with nearly 60% of part-time workers being women. Elderly women receive significantly less in pension and Social Security income. Social rights, such as maternal and child care, are virtually non-existent. Working women are crushed by the high cost of child care, the lack of guaranteed maternity leave, the burden of domestic labor, and the overwhelming individual responsibility placed on them for child rearing. In the so-called land of the free, millions of women face violent and dangerous conditions. Hundreds of women die each year in the U.S. from complications related to pregnancy and childbirth, with working women of color disproportionately affected. Violence against women is widespread. 41% of women in the U.S. experience sexual or physical violence in their lifetime. The murder and disappearance of indigenous women remains an ongoing crisis, with cases persisting across the country. Altogether, the U.S. accounts for 70% of femicides in developed capitalist countries, with 3 women killed every day. Migrant women face some of the most severe circumstances: surveillance, detention, persecution by ICE, family separation, medical neglect, and concentration in some of the most exploitative and low-wage sectors: caregiving, hospitality, and agriculture. The conditions faced by working women are not an anomaly. It is the barbarity of capitalism where profits precede life, where bombs are dropped on schools in Iran, killing 160 girls, where the peoples of Cuba, Iran, Ukraine, Gaza, and beyond are condemned to hunger, misery, and death. The path here is clear. This system must change. Working women can place no hope in the parties of capital, the Democrats and Republicans. The lives of women will not change under these parties of profit, under these policies. The wars they both wage with advanced killing machines will continue to displace and maim working women across the world. The emancipation of women is necessary, and it is their organization that will lead them there, to the abolition of private property and the complete integration of women into social life free of exploitation. working women are on the front lines of the crises generated by the capitalist system, and the emancipation of women is a fundamental precondition for the realization of communism. Working women are an essential force in the struggle for socialism-communism. Our emancipation as workers is inseparable from this victory. Next, the Communist Workers' Platform released a statement denouncing the imperialist nature of the U.S.-Israel war on Iran, where it states, "In the early morning of February 28th, the U.S. and Israel conducted coordinated attacks on Iran named Operation Epic Fury, where Israel targeted Lebanon to destroy Hezbollah infrastructure and prevent counterattacks by Iran, while the U.S. aimed to dismantle Iran's ballistic missile and nuclear programs through bombings of military and military buildings. As of today, the U.S. and Israel continue their criminal attacks on Iran for the 11th straight day." Along with the escalating U.S.-Israeli raids on critical state and military infrastructure, murderous attacks on densely populated urban centers, hospitals and schools, on warehouses, energy stations, and pipelines or refineries are all intensifying, increasing the crimes against the Iranian people. These criminal attacks of the U.S.-Israel follow a buildup of military forces in the region, the Persian Gulf, the Arabian Sea, and the northern Indian Ocean, marking the largest U.S. mobilization since 2003, when the Bush administration and the so-called Coalition of the Willing launched an imperialist attack against Iraq. The entire region has become a flaring torrent of imperialist antagonisms, threatening to spill over into a broader conflict. As of the evening of March 10th, U.S.-Israeli strikes have killed 1,300 Iranians. This includes the bombing of an all-girls elementary school, which killed 175 schoolgirls. These strikes have also killed the supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei. Trump is threatening to ramp up the attacks if Iran blocks the Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% to 25% of the world's oil and natural gas passes, and is the main sea corridor for exports from Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, the UAE, and Qatar. Trump has not taken the deployment of ground troops off the table. Meanwhile, the murderous state of Israel carries on its offensive in Lebanon, where it has launched over 600 airstrikes, resulting in hundreds of deaths and over 500,000 displaced. Already, the economic consequences of the imperialist attacks are being felt, with Brent oil prices, that is the main oil market responsible for setting around 80% of the world's traded crude oil, jumped to $120 per barrel on March 9th. In the U.S., prices of gasoline rose 15%. The International Monetary Fund, the IMF, and the bank Goldman Sachs have warned that the global capitalist system is at risk of recession if the conflict is prolonged. These military attacks arise from the driving laws of capitalism and imperialism. Under the Trump presidency, the U.S. military budget is expected to soar to $1 trillion, reflecting the growing war economy and the preparations of the ruling class to aggressively seize new markets, investment opportunities, raw materials, transport routes, and cheaper labor in order to overcome the looming capitalist crisis. What capital needs are new outlets, and it intends to find them on mountains of corpses of the peoples of the world. Operation Epic Fury is but another element in the competition between the great imperialist powers of the US, EU, Israel, and NATO on one hand, and China, Russia, Iran on the other. A link in the plans of the US and its allies for a, quote, new or greater Middle East. It is another flash in the pan of capitalism's long slide towards a generalized imperialist conflict which will cost the lives of millions of workers and people. The Communist Workers' Platform rejects the pretext that the intervention of the U.S., Israel, and Iran, supported by the previous figures of the Iranian monarchy, is being carried out in the interest of those sectors of the Iranian people who took to the street to protest the economic and political conditions in the country. War with Iran will only lead to death and suffering for the Iranian people. The Communist Workers' Platform rejects the attempts of this government, of the Trump government, to project the title of state sponsor of terrorism onto any competitor, while it is responsible for or behind the strangulation and slaughters in Cuba, Gaza, Syria, Yemen, Sudan, Venezuela, Ukraine, excluding the bloody history of the U.S. within its own borders. We stand by the people of Iran against this imperialist attack. The energy of the workers and people of the United States cannot be spent on mobilizations and protests alone. The movement cannot be our final goal. A substantial alteration of the political, diplomatic, and economic relations of U.S. policy is necessary. Such a change is only possible through a social response, and only the proletariat, the working class, has the capacity to paralyze everything and demonstrate a rejection of this imperialist war. The workers' movement is the only independent agent that has no objective interest in the continuation of imperialist war or in the suffering of the Iranian people. On the contrary, the working class holds a position that it allows it to take a side in this conflict, the side that repudiates war for profit and stands in solidarity with the Iranian people. An effective response can only flow from an organized working class and the workers' movement as the only force capable of bringing the imperialists to their knees and putting an end to their plans. The Communist Workers' Platform demands the complete and permanent withdrawal of U.S. military forces from outside the country's borders, the closure of all U.S. military bases, an end to cooperation with the murderous state of Israel, and the permanent cessation of all imperialist agreements and alliances, including the recent Board of Peace, the Abraham Accords, and Operation Prosperity Guardian, all three of which are aimed at achieving the plans of the monopolies in the Middle East. Let us mobilize a response to the aims of the ruling class, an organized workers' movement with a Communist Party at its lead. This is our greatest duty to the peoples of Iran. Our weapons must be turned against our exploiters, our common enemy, the capitalist class and its rotten capitalist system. With the fires of war spreading, the tech monopolies of the U.S. want a piece of the pie. And in the U.S., the main players are competing for large war contracts from the Department of War. The U.S. government has made good on its threat to Anthropic, the company behind the leading AI model Claude, as the deadline passed without the company accepting the use of Claude by the U.S. government without any restrictions. Anthropic did not accept that its model could be used for mass surveillance of U.S. citizens without, of course, objecting to other people's, and for the creation and operation of drones and other machines that could autonomously kill people. This is because it believes that Claude is not yet ready for such responsibility. In contrast, a deal with the U.S. Department of War was finally made by its competitor OpenAI of ChatGPT, although its head, Sam Altman, tried to present it differently. Earlier, a similar agreement had been signed by the Grok model company, Elon Musk's AI model. Now, Anthropic has been barred from a $200 million contract with the War Department and, most importantly, has been labeled a supply chain risk, meaning that any private company that has dealings with the U.S. government is prohibited from using Anthropic's Claude model. However, Anthropic has been rapidly increasing its profits year after year, reaching $20 billion this year. The threat against Anthropic has provoked a reaction from employees of Google, the Gemini model, and OpenAI. About 900 employees of Google and 100 employees of OpenAI, the majority of them software engineers, have so far signed a document calling on the two companies to refuse the demands of the U.S. Department of War, to use their models for mass surveillance of U.S. citizens, and autonomous killing of people by machines without human supervision. However, even this appeal, which is not concerned with surveillance and killing in general, but only when they involve U.S. citizens and are carried out without human authorization, is not made with any concept of the emancipation of workers. Having adopted the bourgeois notion that we are all one family, and showing no trace of awareness regarding competition between monopolies, the appeal is directed at the leaders of these companies, urging them to set aside their differences and stand together against the U.S. government. Meanwhile, Kenneth Payne, the professor of strategy at King's College in London, has pre-published a study he conducted with three of the leading models, Claude, Gemini, and GPT 5.2, putting them to work in the context of strategic competition between nuclear powers. He found that the models spontaneously attempted to deceive the adversary. They gave the impression that they would follow a course they did not intend to follow, examined the reasoning of opponents based on their beliefs, and predicted their moves while displaying convincing self-awareness, examining their own strategic capabilities before acting. The study notes that for all three models, there is no nuclear taboo, and in all cases of crisis that were put to them, they proceeded to nuclear escalation, mainly with tactical nuclear weapons, which in few cases reached a confrontation with strategic nuclear weapons. Not once did any model back down or show any willingness to compromise, even when under great pressure. Threats always led to further escalation. The credibility of the adversary accelerated rather than prevented escalation. Payne concluded that it is imperative that we understand more about how increasingly capable models think, especially as they begin to provide decision to support for military generals. We are using AI in situations and to improve strategic theory and doctrine, and soon we'll be using it in combat decisions. We finished today's episode by covering the massive scandal which has been sending a shockwave throughout the U.S., with many demanding a change. The U.S. is being rocked by the biggest scandal in generations. The Epstein affair proves the existence of a vast network encompassing the top ranks of the ruling class, the political leadership, and the country's elites in general and beyond, which is, to put it very cautiously, closely connected to the state of Israel. Its business trafficking young women, adolescents, and children, rape, torture, murder, and possibly cannibalism. No heinous crime, no horror, is not found in the 3 million Epstein files that have been released. Given the heavy censorship of the released documents and the fact that another 3 million files remain sealed, there is ample room for the imagination to picture the parts of this dark world that we do not yet know about. The fact that Epstein, on the day the FBI announced he would be prosecuted, immediately bought over 1,200 liters of sulfuric acid, enough to dispose of numerous bodies without a trace, should be enough to give us the worst nightmares. And the question must also be asked, which other members of the ruling class were involved in serious crimes related to the Epstein affair, crimes which continue to be covered up by the U.S. Department of Justice. After all, we know, for example, that Donald Trump was repeatedly accused of rape, none of which was proven in court, which is not to be expected given the power structures of the U.S. state, and that Trump maintained close personal ties to Epstein. So far, there have been no consequences in the form of prosecution of the perpetrators, apart from the ridiculously short 13-month prison sentence for Epstein himself. And it is questionable whether there will be any. During his lifetime, Epstein was protected, for example, by Pam Bondi, now Attorney General in the Trump administration, who served as Florida's Attorney General from 2011 to 2019 and prevented the prosecution of numerous allegations. Even now, the authorities' primary approach is to protect the perpetrators, whose names, unlike those of the victims themselves, have been largely redacted in the published files. The U.S. ruling class and the media system it controls are busy trying to contain the fallout caused by the release of the files. This demonstrates not only that the mass media are a willing instrument in the hands of the ruling class, ready to publish any far-fetched nonsense as long as it serves the interests of that class, but also that such acrobatics show that the ruling class is running out of excuses. It is becoming increasingly difficult to simply cover up their crimes. It should come as no surprise to anyone with their eyes even remotely open that large segments of the ruling class in imperialist society consist of depraved, utterly unscrupulous, and despicable individuals who stop at nothing and know no moral boundaries. The same ruling class that raped and murdered children and teenagers on Epstein's Island is responsible for the mass extermination of hundreds of thousands of children and teenagers in Gaza in recent years, for millions of deaths in Iraq, for millions of people who died prematurely in the former Soviet Union as a direct consequence of the counter-revolution, from hunger, alcoholism, collapsing healthcare systems, and the ensuing wars. They are responsible for 2 world wars, for massacres of millions in Korea, Vietnam, Indonesia, and countless other countries, for countless deaths, even in the world's richest country, as a result of the underfunded healthcare systems, homelessness, or because a consistent pandemic response would have placed too much strain on public finances. They are the ones who, year after year, decide to do nothing to combat climate change and sacrifice the survival of future generations on the altar of profit. They are the ones who are preparing now for a third world war and who clearly state in every talk show that they would rather let us all die on the front lines than give us an inch in the imperialist struggle with rivals, Russia and China, for the redivision of the world. All of this is not an expression of any innate evil character. Rather, the corruption of these individuals is a necessary condition of their job. In a sense, it's part of their job description as the masks of capital, as bearers of an inherently cynical system. Yet, precisely because of this function, it is unforgivable not to assume these criminals are capable of any crime whatsoever, as long as it serves their interests. These are people who are accustomed to anonymously wiping out dozens, hundreds, or even tens of thousands of civilians with their signature or a mouse click, and who simultaneously experience daily that even the most heinous crime goes unpunished as long as it is committed in the name of the ruling class. For these individuals, it is probably natural, and they may find even satisfaction in directly exercising power and violence against the defenseless, including children. What are 1, 2, or 100 more corpses anyways? But the Epstein affair is far more than just evidence of the perverse excesses of a rotten system. It is also a direct product of the foreign policy of the Western imperialist alliance system, and, in particular, of the murderous regime in Israel, probably the most malevolent offspring of contemporary imperialism. Former Israeli intelligence officer Ari Ben Menashe is quoted as saying that Israel used Epstein to trap a number of U.S. presidents, including Trump. That is, to blackmail them with their involvement in the rape of minors and other crimes. But even without this statement, Jeffrey Epstein was married to Ghislaine Maxwell, daughter of Robert Maxwell, who, according to Epstein himself, was a Mossad agent. He was close friends with former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, who frequented Epstein's island. He fled to Israel, like numerous other sex offenders, to avoid prosecution for his crimes. An internal FBI memo from 2020 quotes an anonymous source as saying that Epstein worked for Mossad. The same is said about the prominent pro-Israel lobbyist Alan Dershowitz, who was not only an advisor and personal friend of Netanyahu, but was also Epstein's lawyer in court. That Epstein was an agent of the Israeli Secret Service, and indeed a very important one, who committed his crimes in the course of his work for it, must therefore be considered highly probable. Epstein's horror universe thus also gives us a glimpse into the absolute ruthlessness and depravity of the power politics of capitalist governments. It's a glimpse that shows bourgeois states simply function exactly as Marxist-Leninist state theory has always predicted, states as instruments of capitalist rule that allow the capitalists to get away with any crime. Epstein is a product of a system in which neither life nor sexual self-determination nor the right of minors to a childhood free from violence counts for anything. They're not merely an indictment of the rapists, murderers, and child abusers of the ruling system who get away with their crimes unpunished and against whom, of course, harsh prosecution must be demanded. Anyone who wants their children to grow up safely in a world without monsters must fight for the overthrow of capitalism, for the socialist revolution.